Welcome back to another episode of Extra Literary Affairs. This October, we're not chasing monsters or splattering blood, classic horror moves. We're diving into something far more disturbing: the eerie, the uncanny, and yes, Joey, the unsettling. These are stories that haunt you not with gore, but with ideas. A whisper in the dark, a memory that does not belong to you, a town that simply vanishes from every map without an explanation. Twist on the familiar, which takes us to something alien, and it leaves you questioning, what exactly is reality? Horror isn't loud, it's quiet. It creeps in through the crack in your certainty. It's the dread of a thought you just can't shake, a truth you wish you hadn't uncovered. These are stories that linger, that make you look over your shoulder, not because something is there, but because something might be. Today, Joey and I will be having an affair with W. W. Jacobs and his classic tale of supernatural suspense, The Monkey's Paw. It's a short story about wishes, consequences, and the terrifying ambiguity of fate. Whether you read it in school or simply stumbled upon this recently, this tale is going to stick with you. But before we get into The Monkey's Paw, let's just take a moment to ground ourselves and meet the author, W. W. Jacobs. He was born in London in 1863. He spent his early years near the riverside where his father worked at a wharf, and that maritime past really shaped the type of narratives that he would be telling for the rest of his life. While Jacobs is mostly known for his humorous tales about sailors and dock workers, he was very popular in his time, but the Jacobs that we know in this story has a much darker side. He rarely wrote horror, but when he did, it was unforgettable. Monkey's Paw is his most famous story. It's a masterclass in quiet dread. There's no gore, there are no traditional monsters, just a mysterious talisman, a grieving family, and the terrifying consequences of wishful thinking. Jacobs didn't need to shock to scare you. He used suggestion, restraint, and irony. His horror is purely psychological, moral, and it's deeply human, and that's what makes it linger. The story was published in 1902, and Joey, I am really looking forward to hearing what your first experiences with this story were.
Well, I've read this story a bunch of times. I don't even remember how many times now. But I did not read this in school. I feel like a lot of people would read this in school because he's a classic author. Earlier in my reading life, I was searching for the foundational horror texts, and this is one of those, along with Frankenstein, Dracula, Dr. Jekyll, and Mr. Hyde, The Picture of Dorian Gray. I've read them all. So if you love horror and you like to explore how the horror genre has evolved over time, then this is a great story to start with. If you want to read literary horror, you should read this one if you don't want to read genre horror, which oddly enough, I have an episode of the old Extra Literary Affairs when it was basically just me. When I compare this story with The Road Virus Heads North by Stephen King, I explain why one is considered genre fiction, being Stephen King, and this one being considered literary fiction, and the potential for them to be both at the same time. So if you're interested in all of that, I highly suggest you listen to it because it's really good. This is a great story, and it is pretty quiet and subdued compared to a horror novel or novella or short story from today. The opposite of what we're reading is like gore and guts and body horror and all that kind of stuff. That's not in here. It's very subtle and it's very effective.
I think it's worth noting that is maybe 10 pages long. It's a very short story. It's very easy to read. There are a few dated timestamps and some wording that definitely harkens back. It's like, okay, this was written in another time period. It was written in 1902, 100 and some years later. We're still talking about it. So obviously it has some legs and can stand on its own. It reminded me of being a fifth grade kid getting into the spooky mindset. I went to school with a girl and her last name was Jacobs, and she would always like to tell us these haunted stories, haunted houses, going deep into the woods, and it's dark. She just did a great job of setting the tone, and that's what this story felt like. On one level, it wasn't very sophisticated. You didn't have to have an amazing vocabulary or make some big psychological leaps to be intrigued with the story of like, well, and then what happens? And then what happens? I think the simplicity and the foreshadowing he does right from the get-go of the father would never want to put his son in peril. They were playing chess. He sets up this whole board. The only thing the father did in this story was make a foolish choice, which then harmed his child. Isn't that interesting? So, Joey, I really enjoyed looking at it as just a fun and then what happened story. But then peeling back the layers, I'm like, there's a lot of psychological horror. The moral question I have been thinking about since I read the story. If you were granted 3 wishes that were going to come through, no cost to you, whatever's going to happen is going to happen, would you do it? The author asked us in that story to contemplate that, and the person he asked it to said, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. And when somebody tells you they are not sure they would make the same choice again, I generally try to steer clear of making a similar choice, because if you are not going to endorse this, maybe it's not for me.
Yeah, I think this story is super effective because it is so subtle, because it's, like you were saying, a psychological horror story where we have to really sit with that question. It becomes really effective as W.W. Jacobs writes this as an isolated area. They're stuck in a house. Jacobs writes, this is from Mr. White, who is the father. That's the worst of living so far out, bawled Mr. White, with sudden and unlooked for violence. Of all the beastly, slushy, out-of-the-way places to live in, this is the worst. Pathway's a bog, and the road's a torrent. I don't know what people are thinking about. I suppose because only 2 houses in the road are let, they think it doesn't matter. We immediately get the sense, and this is in the very beginning of the story, that this is a hard-to-get-to place. It's not only isolated, but it's a forgotten area of wherever they live. Maybe in a village in the middle of nowhere in England or in the English countryside. But we can get the sense that it's physically hard for people to get there. And so when Sergeant General Morris gets there, it's a surprise to the family because the conditions are not correct for visitors here. So we're surprised that there is someone that has access to us. I think that's really important when you're writing and reading a psychological horror, is that you have to know that there's no help coming. I think it immediately sets the tone for the story so that you already have sort of this dread because you're like, oh my God, we know this is going to be bad. Okay. Unless you don't go into this knowing it's going to be a horror story, then maybe you're surprised. But if you do, then you immediately get the sense like, oh no, there's no backup here. They might not be able to even get out. We don't know at this point. So there's so many variables that they have to deal with. And there's something that's very specific that he writes about Mr. White, that he is with sudden and unlooked for violence. So we get an extra layer of, we have an unpredictable character who is probably prone to violent acts. It seems like he loves his family, but he does doom them. We have these 2 very immediate things that are established in the story that really set the tension for the rest of it, and which, again, is crucial for a psychological horror story.
Joey, thank you for calling that out, and also how this story, because it was written so long ago, sets some of the standards of things that we think about when we think about horror. The isolation of the family, the unpredictability of the father figure who it seems like they're just having a nice game of chess, and then he gets peeved that his son wins the chess game, and the son and the mother, they had a knowing glance between them of like, okay, dad's at it again. Then you get a mysterious knock at the door and we're like, we're not expecting visitors because literally nobody comes out here ever. So who could this be? Oh, lo and behold, it's somebody that I knew 21 years ago before he shipped off to be a sailor on the 7 seas. Somebody hearkening from the past. He has this mysterious vibe about him. Joey, I love that there's a physical object. And the physical object does not come out until literally after 3 glasses of scotch. Okay, on drink number 3, there's this thing I was going to tell you about. And I don't tell many people because nobody's going to believe this story, but let me just roll it out for you. Even the description of the shriveled, mummified monkey's paw, for me, that's a little gross and horrifying. Not the scariest thing I've ever heard, but you just pull that out of your pocket. Ew. Taxidermy's not for me. I can attest to that, but yay for you if it is. The suspensefulness of unfolding the story. He's very reliable as a narrator, as the sailor saying, nobody's going to believe this story, but I'm telling you this happened to me. This is a charmed object, someone in India, the fakirs, Fakirs. That was an interesting word. And what's the origin of that word? They harmed this object. And he said there are 3 wishes granted to 3 separate men, right? So you get 1 chance, 3 wishes, off you go. Well, what happened to the first guy? It's like, I'm not going to tell you what happened to the first guy, but I'm the second guy. And I'm going to tell you what happened to me. There's 1 set of wishes left. And somebody's going to need to take them, but maybe they won't. So he throws it into the fire, right, Joey? And I love that. He's like, throw it into the fire. Get rid of it. Like, this is supernatural, like something weird. I'm not doing it. The father sees it move in the fire and he pulls it out. And he was like, let's, maybe this is nothing, but maybe I'll just hold on to it.
Yeah, if you don't want it, I'll take it.
You have had like 3 drinks and maybe that happened, maybe that didn't, but I think you imagined it. He's like, I didn't imagine it. And because we've had that threat of violence from the very start of the story, it was like, woman, listen to me. I'm like, okay, fine. And I think that was just very masterfully the subtext of what was going on there, looking at human nature. I think this is very much a story about human nature. If you're given what seems like something too good to be true, are you going to be like, what's the worst that can happen? I'm like, oh, I don't know. Evil spirits can come and kill you. I mean, that's an option always. Or this is all make believe. His wife said, oh, it's like a story of the Arabian Nights. Why don't we just wish for extra household help? And again, patriarchy, guys.
Well, she says you should ask, could I have 4 more arms or hands? So she's aware that it would be most likely her that just has to do all the work still.
Can you help a girl out and give me some extra hands? That was interesting.
Unless she meant like actual people. I assumed she meant like, can I have 4 more arms to do more work? But maybe she meant like, I want 4 people to come in and help.
Joey, I had the exact same question. I'm like, okay, it's India, and I think this was a very exotic. He makes it clear, this is a British writer who wrote this in 1902, that, people in general, I think, were not widely traveled. So saying that something came from India is still going to have this mythic feeling. It's going to feel very unfamiliar, very magical. And so maybe it was like the Indian god that gives a body multiple arms, because the way he wrote it seemed like that way. Oh, maybe she just means bring me some extra helpers. But the sailor said, if you're going to make wishes, don't be foolish. You really need to think this out. Don't say the first thing that comes to your head. Think it through. And he doesn't tell them why to think it through or what the unintended consequences might be. He was just like, be thoughtful. Okay, fine. He goes away, leaves the monkey paw behind. Then they're faced with this dilemma. I love that they hung it on a hook in their parlor. It's just an object of art. We're just going to set it over there. I'm not going to think about it. Then Dad's like, I can't sleep. I got to figure this out. Joey, do you want to tell us what happens when he actually gets it and he's like, okay, I'm going to make my wish?
Yeah, they, of course, ask for riches. How much was 200 pounds at this time in England? I don't know. There's probably quite a bit of money. I guess that was as much as they could fathom as riches, but that is what they ask for, is for money.
The son suggested it. How much would it take to pay off our house? Right, 200 pounds. Ask for that.
Not more, but that.
They'll ask for it, and then they're looking at each other like, well, a bag of money didn't just land upstairs on our bed. That was a stupid hoax. Of course, this didn't happen. And we're like, okay, so everyone goes to bed. Things are fine. Kid goes back out into his life because he's not a child. He's a young adult, I felt. And then another weird guy out in their front yard who walks to the door, then walks away, then walks to the door, walks away. Again, that tension of, why are we now suddenly getting all these visitors? That's also weird. He's very well dressed, but he doesn't come up to the door and say what he has to say. He's kind of loitering around. We find out, Joey, through that exposition, that their one and only living child, because they had lost a child previously, they make a note of saying this was the last kid we had and ever going to have, had been killed by some machinery. He got gobbled up in an industrial accident. The guy's like, I'm so sorry to tell you this. I didn't do it, but I'm here as an agent of the company. And the dad's like, how much? He knew what was coming. You just, as a person, feel this dread. And it's like, 200. That was just one of those moments of like, you had to be kidding me. It was sad and tragic and ironic that the son of all people was the one who named the amount they should ask for. And he was the one who was sacrificed. His life made that possible. And I just thought that was also interesting, Joey.
What's interesting about this story is that I think our focus is meant to stay on this mummified, desiccated monkey's paw. We know how he gets it, but how did that come about? We don't know. I think it's interesting in this story that we are supposed to question who is the real antagonist of the story. Is it this monkey's paw or is it Sergeant General Morris? Because the monkey paw really is a MacGuffin, which, to anyone who doesn't know, it's an object that the object doesn't matter. That the thing could have been a piece of gold. It could have been a shoe. It didn't matter what the object was. It just matters what it adds to the story.
Was charmed in some way, like
Yes.
something was added to it.
Yeah, it'll add to the plot, but the object itself means nothing to the story. Which, if you any fans of Lord of the Rings, the one ring, that's a MacGuffin. Does not matter that it's a ring. It could have been literally anything else. It would not have changed the story. But we're not here to talk about Lord of the Rings.
And they'd have to rename the whole series, Joey. That's not my thing, but it's the Lord of the insert word here. That doesn't work.
Yeah, it could have been like the Lord of the Shoes. It doesn't have a nice ring to it. No pun intended. But anyway, the author Jacobs makes us question who is the real antagonist, because we can, as you're explaining, the father is sort of the downfall because he makes the wish, but as you said, it was his son's idea to get the 200 pounds to pay off the house. If only the house was only 200 pounds now. We have some choices for who the true antagonist is here, and I think that it's probably Morris, because I think he came with malevolent intent. I don't know why after 21 years that they're reconnecting, and it doesn't really seem like they have a plan to meet. It seems like it's more of a surprise, like, what the hell is this guy doing here? But he's very excited to see his old friend. What I think is really interesting is that the mother and the son don't really buy his stuff. They're not sure that he's telling them the truth. I think they think he's engaging in this tendency for people of a certain age to sort of glorify their life and mythologize it. I think they see that the things that he's actually saying are probably not 100% true. There's probably a kernel of thread in there, but it's mostly bullshit.
Like a tall tale.
Like, he's telling it to entertain his friends. Well, I wouldn't say they're his friends. If you were my friend and you brought that to me, I would not think you're my friend. But I think everyone else seems to get that except for Mr. White. We have this element of pathos that's happening now because he is this man who is of higher socioeconomic status, who has served in the military, who has gone to India to like make his riches, which anyone that's familiar with English history or literature from this era and earlier, all the way to like Jane Austen and earlier, typically men and English men would go to Africa or India to make their fortune and come back. And of course, they're doing horrible shit. We have this person, Morris, that comes in and has this pathos, so he is immediately believed by Mr. White. It's interesting that we have that dynamic that he's not really believed by Mrs. White or by Herbert. The only first name that we get is Herbert, which is such a fun name to say. I think it's Morris who would be the antagonist here because he brings it. You have to question why he does everything that he's doing. Why did you come here randomly on a night? You should not have felt super comfortable coming all the way out here when the roads are not their best. Maybe it's snowing out, or at least in my imagination it's snowing out. And then you brought this monkey paw from India. So in my mind, I thought, is this part of the deal? Because he says the last guy who had it, the first owner of the monkey's paw, his last wish was for death. So he obviously knew this person, or whoever collected the monkey paw next, who was not intending to use it, had to give him that information. If he throws it into the fire, is he being a good friend because he has this moment of clarity, like, I can save this person from this nightmare? Or is it, I'm trying to entice him by saying, surely you don't want this, and I know nothing's going to happen to this magical monkey's paw, so I'm going to throw it into the fire, and it will only entice you more.
Joey, I love that you said that, because setting up that trope of it was a dark and stormy night, the snow is falling, it's utterly quiet, and there's a knock on the door of someone you don't recognize in the moment. And then you're like, oh, my old friend from 20 years ago. I agree with you. Did he come there just because he happened to be in the neighborhood? They did say he just came back from an adventure. And oh, by the way, after 3 drinks, I decided I'd just pull this out. I've primed the pump for storytelling, right? Well, we've exhausted all the regular topics. Now I'm going to give you a supernatural, creepy tale. We often talk about power dynamics, who's believed, who's unbelievable, that type of thing. The fact that both the son and the wife, who theoretically in this time period would be considered less savvy than perhaps the father, who was the gentleman who had been out in the world. The father said, I wish I had a chance to go to India. If I was a younger man, I would do that too. And the wife's like, yeah, sure you would. She wasn't having it. Both the son and the mom were a little dubious. And as you said, the consequences to the son by asking for the request and then being killed was very difficult. Now, the mom is overcome with grief when she finds out, yes, we have the money. I don't want the money. There's no giving the money back. My son can't be raised from the dead. And she's like, well, wait a minute.
We can.
I think that's going to be what I want to do. And Joey, I wanted to go back before we switch into that topic. Morris set the story up by saying The last guy's final wish was for death. So that lets our imagination run wild because this is probably not a society in which euthanasia is a topic we talk about a lot. Most people don't wish for death unless there's something completely horrific happening. And so when the mom said, I know what my wish is, and the dad's like, no, you don't. She's like, yeah, give it to me. You
Yeah, I
had your
know.
turn and look what happened. Now it's my turn to make a wish. And that completely creeped me out. And we go back to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which was 100 years prior to this.
Was that 1816?
1816, yeah. So almost 100 years prior. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, another classic tale, as we were talking earlier, partly because of her grief for losing her own children. She was very much consumed with this loss of life, and she was interested in, can you reanimate the dead? And so the fact that it comes up in the story and the mom's like, yeah, I got my wish, just do it. And we're sitting here as readers thinking, what's going to happen? Is the author actually going to take us to another knock on the door, and you're going to open it and you're going to see this decomposing body just standing there like a zombie? Because the dad calls out, our son has been dead for 2 weeks. We don't do embalming.
It's not going to be good.
There's no cryogenic preservation happening. It's not going to be pleasant. She's like, no, I'm getting my wish. I don't care what the consequences are. And we see how that goes, Joey. And then what happened?
Yeah, they make the wish and then they hear another mysterious knock on the door. But the ambiguity of the story, which you started out saying that this is what was involved in this, is that we never see what's behind the door. The last wish is used, which is to stop all of this from happening, so we don't ever get to know, is it actually their reanimated son? Was the 200 pounds that they gained from Herbert dying at work and the company being like, we're not responsible for it, but like we kind of feel bad, so like whatever, here's 200 pounds and shut up about it and don't tell anyone. So literally nothing has changed, basically.
Joy, I was thinking the exact same thing. I'm like, no corporate liability, but we will pay you off to remain silent.
Yeah, this is not our fault though, just remember that.
Totally coincidental. Totally coincidental.
Yeah, I think that's the most really effective horror for me, when we don't get to see what the potential thing is supposed to be. I think that's why this story had such an effective ending, is because we don't get to see behind the door. We don't find out the answer to the mystery of who was knocking and why does it stop at the same time he wishes for it. It could be a coincidence. It could have just been like, oh, this is not the right house. I'm at the wrong house. It's the other one that's supposed to be here. Or it could be 100% true. This is a supernatural story. We don't know. We don't really have any hard evidence other than a coincidence with Herbert.
Joey, I love that you brought our attention to that, because when the son made the wish originally, it took a couple of days for the fulfillment of that wish. So when the mom says, I want my son back, he doesn't come back right away. It's not like, poof, he's sitting in a chair. And she's like, oh, I guess it didn't work. And they're like, wait a minute, couple days. Oh, it's 2 miles away. It's going to take him some time to dig himself out of his grave,
And then, like,
transcend,
drag with one
and
leg.
truck on down
Like
to
a
our
zombie.
house, right? Well, that was interesting. And what was horrifying, as you said, we don't see it, we don't hear it, we don't smell it, we don't taste it, we don't know what this body is going to be like. But I can speak for myself. The despair of losing someone drove her to that idea of, I don't care in what form he comes back, I want him back. And that dad's like, he's going to be decomposed. It's not going to be our son. He is gone. And she's like, I don't care. This story is so much about the unintended consequences. Do you really want the wish? If you think it logically through, do you really want what it is going to cost you in the end? There are no shortcuts. So the father, I have mixed feelings about him, because if he really did think that his son had been reanimated from the dead and is now a zombie slash whatever showing up at their doorstep, was he saving both his own life and his wife's horror at seeing this deceased yet reanimated son? Is he saving her by saying, last and final wish? He didn't say none of this happened. He said, my son doesn't get reanimated from the dead. Just that interesting moment. And what that set up was the larger question, which we talk about a lot when we talk about the Odyssey and other stories. Was the fate of this family sealed? Or was it their own free will of being greedy and emotionally unhinged and deep into grief that caused them to make choices that ultimately made their situations worse?
When you were saying in the beginning, this is a morality tale, what is the name when it's a morality tale?
A parable.
It's just a parable. Thank you. I knew there was a word that could sum that up better. which is a morality tale, in case anyone didn't know that, because I forgot. Is there a larger message that we're supposed to get, or is this pure entertainment? Is it like, don't wish for things you're not entitled to or that you didn't work for? The money, that's sort of the retribution is, well, you didn't get it, so you had to earn it some way, and the cost was your son's life. If we assume that it did actually happen, what would have been the cost if they were to actually be able to reanimate their son? What were they going to do? Live with him? That really wouldn't work in real world. But does he still decompose? Is he just stuck at decomposition in this moment of 2 weeks? And I'm assuming it's pretty cold out, so maybe he's like slowly decomposing at this point.
And Joey, the solicitor who came to say, wasn't our fault, but this happened, said he got caught up in some machinery. So he has been mangled, messed up. So we'll just pretend the decomposition is not a problem, and the smell and the oozing and all of the stuff. You're also now in bits and pieces. You are not fully intact as you were when you left the house. Everything about that is horrific.
Well, then how does he knock? I didn't think about his cause of death, but how the hell does he knock?
I'm going to say he knocked his head on the door. Why not? It's our story. We can tell it how we want. But Joey, if we were looking at it deeper, and that's what we do, even if the author didn't intend to put these nuggets in, this is what we decided to pull out. Back to your story. What happens when you try to reach above your station? You try to get things that you did not earn. There will be a pound of flesh to be paid for this overstepping. Is it a story about machinery and the industrial age that was coming that literally ate your child? He didn't get run over by a horse-drawn carriage. He got caught in some mechanical machinery by a corporation that then paid for his life. Interesting. The monkey's paw came from a foreign land. So again, colonialism. But I don't think at that point the British weren't like, hey, that wasn't a great idea. They're like, yeah, we rule. Literally, we rule everything.
Yeah, we rolled literally.
So I don't think it was a note on that. Everything belongs to us. The idea that the father was trying to gain something just stopped me in its tracks when he said the last person who made the last wish, he wished for death. Now, in organized traditional religious society, you're not allowed to have suicide. That's just a no-no. You don't do those things. Then the author brings up the idea of reanimation of the dead. These are not well-known, happy-go-lucky, standard conversational fare. So I just thought it was very interesting. What was he actually about? Because in his author bio, they said he normally writes satirical, comedic travel stories about people from strange lands. This is not that. This is very dark.
Yeah. I'm not sure what the authorial intent is here. Is because it's possible that it's just an entertaining story and that's all it's meant to be. Is it supposed to be a morality tale or a parable? Is it supposed to make us question what we would do in that situation? That was probably what he was trying to get at there in this story, but I'm not sure what I think the intent of this story was. If nothing else, it's just a good horror story.
It holds up over the years. I was in it. I was completely suspending disbelief. And I'm really glad that we took the time to look through that, Joey. And I am really curious, and you don't have to answer this question. This can be rhetorical. If you were granted 3 wishes, what would those 3 wishes be?
I mean, if they work out like the way they worked out in this story, then I would wish for nothing.
I have to agree with you, Joe. It's like, I concur. How about we just leave things exactly the way they are?
Yeah. I could see how this story could come off as a bit like propaganda, which sounds strange, but like elitist propaganda. Don't wish for something more than you are now. Like, you are meant to be this, and when you try to raise yourself up through whatever means possible, it will only ever bite you in the ass. Could be that. Karl Marx, where are you at?
There's no shortcut. Appreciate what you have, because they were so much better off owing 200 pounds on their house with a live child than taking the shortcut. And now they have a dead kid. Their house is paid off, so yay them. But now the wife is probably always going to hate the husband because she thinks he robbed her 2 times. 1, of getting the kid killed in the first place, and 2, not letting him come back from the dead. You can't win in this situation, sir. You should have just let it burn up in the fire. But your temptation, your greed, your curiosity, your whatever was like, what's the harm in keeping it? Well, apparently the destruction of your entire family, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, they kept the temptation until it was too much to bear, and then they were like, well, let me just see. But it's funny because Mr. White, the dad or husband, says, well, I don't really need anything else. I have everything I need, which is very sweet. And his son's like, well, no, wish for money, stupid. Obviously, if we could wish for anything, wish for money. We're poor. Look at us.
Thank you for reminding us of that. Money does not buy happiness. In this case, money brought the destruction of their family. And I had forgotten, shame on me, that the father did say, what could a man like me possibly ask for? I have a healthy child. I have a wife. I have a snug little home. It is on the dead end street where nobody comes, but maybe that's also a plus. He's like, who would be crazy enough to want something different?
He did it anyway.
I really appreciate this conversation. And this kicks off our Halloween spooky season, which I know we both really enjoy. I look forward to diving into another generation of stories. You set us up very beautifully to talk about the history of the horror writing genre. And now we're not going to dive into the big classics. We are trying to take some bite-sized pieces that move us along the time scale of horror. So we are going to shoot a little bit into the future to probably the 1950s, and then we're going to read a contemporary story, and then we're going to close out the month with a full-blown novel, which I am excited about, but also a little freaked out by. So until then, we'll see you later.